It is just before 8 in the morning on Sunday, December the 7th, 1941. The island of Oahu is waking up slowly. Sailors are eating breakfast. Some are still asleep in their bunks. The American flag is being raised on the decks of the great battleships lined up in the harbor. It is a quiet, ordinary morning in paradise. Within the next 2 hours, more than 2,400 Americans will be dead. The most powerful naval base in the Pacific will be in flames. And the United States, a nation that had spent years trying to stay out of the war consuming the rest of the world, will be pulled into it in a single, devastating blow. This is the story of how it happened, why it happened, and how one morning at Pearl Harbor changed the course of the 20th century. If you enjoyed this, a subscribe, bell notification, or comment means the world. It helps the channel grow and keeps me digging up more stories for you. To understand why Japan attacked, you have to understand a nation that felt it had run out of choices. By 1941, Japan had been at war with China for 4 years, burning through oil and resources it did not have. Japan produced almost no oil of its own. Nearly 80% of what it used came from one place, the United States. When Japan pushed into Southeast Asia, Roosevelt cut that supply off completely, overnight. Japanese military planners sat down and calculated exactly how long their nation could continue to function. Their answer was 18 months. 18 months of oil left, and then their navy would stop, their aircraft would be grounded, their empire would collapse without a single enemy soldier setting foot on Japanese soil. Their options, as they saw them, were two: surrender everything they had spent a decade building, or fight. They chose to fight. And the target they chose was the one thing standing between Japan and the resources it needed: the United States Pacific Fleet at Pearl Harbor. The plan was the work of one man, Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto. He was not a reckless gambler. He had studied at Harvard, lived in America, and understood its industrial power better than almost anyone in Japan. Yamamoto knew that in a long war, Japan could not win. America was simply too big, too rich, too productive. But he believed there was one chance. If Japan could destroy the American Pacific Fleet in a single surprise blow, it might buy enough time to seize its empire and force America to negotiate before its full strength could be brought to bear. It was a desperate gamble, and Yamamoto knew it. He warned his superiors that he could run wild for 6 months, perhaps a year, but after that, he had no confidence. The plan demanded total secrecy. A fleet of 6 aircraft carriers would sail thousands of miles across the empty northern Pacific in complete radio silence to a launch point north of Hawaii. No one could know they were coming. In the pre-dawn darkness of December the 7th, the Japanese fleet reached its launch position, 230 miles north of Oahu. On the carrier decks, pilots tied ceremonial headbands around their helmets, climbed into their cockpits, and waited. At 6 in the morning, the order came. 183 aircraft thundered off the decks into the dark sky and turned south. What happened next is one of the most painful moments in American military history. On Oahu, a young Army private named Joseph Lockard was operating a radar station at the northern tip of the island. At 7 o'clock in the morning, his screen lit up with the largest formation of aircraft he had ever seen. He called his superior officer and reported it. The officer told him not to worry. A flight of American B-17 bombers was expected from the mainland that morning. It was probably just those. Private Lockard watched the formation on his screen for another 30 minutes. It did not behave like American bombers. It was too large, and it was coming too fast. At 7:48 in the morning, the first bombs fell on Pearl Harbor. The attack hit a fleet that was completely unprepared. The battleships were moored in neat rows along the eastern side of Ford Island. a formation that would become known as Battleship Row. They were perfect targets. Japanese torpedo planes came in low over the water, dropping torpedoes specially modified to run in the shallow harbor. Dive bombers screamed down from above. The first torpedoes struck the USS West Virginia and the USS Oklahoma. The Oklahoma was hit again and again, and slowly, horribly, she began to roll over, capsizing with hundreds of men still trapped inside. For the sailors on deck, there was barely time to understand what was happening before their world dissolved into fire and noise and chaos. And then came the moment that defined the entire attack. At around 10 minutes past 8, an armor-piercing bomb struck the USS Arizona near her forward ammunition magazine. The bomb punched deep into the ship and ignited over 1 million pounds of gunpowder. The explosion was catastrophic. The Arizona erupted in a fireball that rose hundreds of feet into the air, and the massive battleship was torn apart in an instant. She sank in less than 9 minutes. Of her crew, 1,177 men were killed, nearly half of all the Americans who would die that day, lost on a single ship in a single moment. Many of them remain entombed within her to this day. A second wave arrived less than an hour later, pressing the attack on a harbor already burning and broken. By the time it was over, the numbers were almost impossible to comprehend. 18 ships sunk or badly damaged. Nearly 200 aircraft destroyed on the ground before a single one could get airborne. 2,403 Americans dead, more than 1,000 wounded. Japan had lost 29 aircraft. By every immediate military measure, the attack had succeeded completely. But somewhere in those numbers was a detail that Yamamoto already understood, and that his superiors did not want to hear. The American aircraft carriers had not been in port that morning. They had been out at sea on exercises. They were untouched. And in the history of naval warfare, the age of the battleship was already over. The age of the carrier had begun. Japan had just destroyed the wrong ships. The day after the attack, President Roosevelt stood before Congress and called December the 7th a date which would live in infamy. Within an hour, the United States had declared war on Japan. The nation that had tried so hard to stay out of the conflict was now fully in it, united by anger and resolve in a way it had never been before. And here lies the great irony of Pearl Harbor. The attack was designed to cripple American power. Instead, it awakened it. By a stroke of fortune, the American aircraft carriers had been out at sea that morning and were untouched. Those carriers would become the weapon that turned the tide of the entire Pacific War. Yamamoto's gamble had failed in the most complete way imaginable. He had not crippled a sleeping giant. He had woken it and filled it with a terrible purpose. Less than 4 years later, that purpose would carry American forces all the way to the shores of Japan itself.